welcome. Welcome to Word Up. How many people have been here before? Okay, couple people. The rest of you that are new, this is Word Up Community Bookshop, Librería Comunitaria. We're a nonprofit bookstore / art space that was started back in 2011. We started off as a pop-up shop, but people in the neighborhood kept wanting us to stay open, so then we kept open, renewing our lease until we got kicked out. And then we moved here a year later, and then we've been here ever since. From donations and our partnerships, we've been able to have programs for kids. One of them is actually called the Earth Defenders Initiative, which relates to our presentation today, which we're really excited about. The Earth Defenders Initiative is kids who come together during the school year. They do a virtual book club, they get free books, and they talk about environmental activism and what they can do specifically in their neighborhood during the summertime. They go through the parks and they, get to learn about invasive species and natural habitats and stuff like that. And then we also do, like yesterday for Earth Day, we did a cleanup of Highbridge Park. And so, yeah, those are things we do here. And we're very excited to have two amazing authors / activists / artists. And yeah, we're just excited. So,
thank you so much, Carolina. It was so exciting that you do a program with kids. It's fantastic. And I want to thank Veronica and Lynn also for inviting me to discuss the book Ecoart in Action and my contribution to it. I'm really happy to be here to share the day with you. The Ecoart group is an invitational collective of 200 affiliated practitioners interested in the remediation and protection of our ecosystems. There were 67 contributors to the Ecoart book, and I will discuss 3 of them. I believe that I was invited to be part of the Ecoart network because I organized several environmental exhibits, and I invited prominent scientists like Dr. Gavin Schmidt and Dr. James Hansen from NASA, and Dr. Klaus Jacob from the Earth Institute to be part of the exhibition programming. I was flattered to be asked to join the network, but as a media critic, I wasn't sure where I fit in. But after reading the book, I realized that our ties go much deeper than exhibition programming. Call it a reverence for life, an apprehension of the divine in the ordinary, of sentience in the rocks, in the rivers, in the trees, our deep connection to the created world and the unity of all life, and the mission we have to protect our ecosystems, which lies at the heart of our work. The central problem that this book addresses is, how do we teach the young at a time of climate emergency? How do we give our children hope, perseverance, agency? This book faces our declining ecosystems and gives a blueprint through activities, case studies, and provocations to remediate them. I will give you one example from each category. First of all, what is eco-art? It is not environmental art. This is Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty. The solitary artist uses the land and rocks as his medium for an artwork made literally of the earth, beautiful and resilient. It has lasted since the 1970s. But it is in the interconnection of art, science, community, and activism that the eco-artist stands apart from other genres of art. This is an artwork designed by campers who attended the Art Plus Energy Camp, founded by Elizabeth Monelon and Robert Ferry. Professionally, through the Land Art Generator Initiative, they invite teams from around the world to design public artworks for distributed renewable energy that are also beautiful. The activity in the book replicates this program for a summer camp of 8 to 18-year-olds where the children interact with engineers, architects, and solar installers to design a site-specific solar installation. It's fabulous. This is an example of ecosystem restoration designed by the artist Lillian Ball, working in the Bimini Islands, Western Bahamas, in collaboration with Waterkeepers Bahamas and students from a local high school. They collaboratively rescued red mangrove saplings from a site slated for condominium development and had them replanted by the students in a protected cove on public land. Students then designed a video game called Go Home Bimini from the experience. Lastly, I want to share Ruth Wallen's provocation entitled A Call to Embrace Ecological Grief, which I believe we're all suffering from. This installation was a memorial to the 150 million trees that have died in California since 2010 due to drought and invasive species. A shared space to acknowledge grief helps us to bear the pain. My activity is about critical media literacy. What is that? Critical media literacy shifts the interrogation of the text to an investigation of different forms of mass communication. What sets my work apart from other studies of communication data is that I focus on what is absent rather than what is present. For example, when the IPCC report on mitigation came out 2 weeks ago, I noticed that it was not reported on MSNBC that week. I happen to watch MSNBC sometimes between 9 and 11, no mention of the report. And I thought I was imagining things. Then I read a study from Media Matters that documented that, in fact, the IPCC report was not discussed that week on MSNBC. How is that possible? Now that the report tells us we have a 3-year window to peak gas emissions, an urgent statistic, how was that not reported? My lesson plan on critical media literacy in the Ecoart book addresses the underreporting of climate studies. It delineates how to turn our students into science investigators with original research on urgent and underreported local issues. This activity enlarges the skill set beyond the art room and connects the focus of the engaged student artist to the remediation of our fragile ecosystems. This involvement with local environmental issues will foster a sense of agency rather than helplessness. This is Dr. James Hansen from NASA. I can never look at this photograph without getting sick. He is our top climate scientist. He's former head of NASA. In this photo, he's in handcuffs because he's being arrested at the White House, protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. We all know that he advised Congress in 1988 that the Earth was warming. That's common knowledge. However, most people do not know that when he spoke to Congress again 20 years later in 2008, his remarks were not reported in any American newspaper. I found them in the Guardian newspaper in England. What did he say? He called for the CEOs of fossil fuel companies to be, quote, tried for high crimes against humanity and nature. I'm going to say that one more time. Our chief climate scientist called for the CEOs of fossil fuel companies to be tried for high crimes against humanity and nature. Any wonder why that wasn't reported in this country? When I was thinking about an artwork to make out of this really awful event, the image of Edward Hopper's Early Sunday Morning came to mind. I don't know why, but it became this artwork, Early Wednesday Morning. Early Wednesday Morning documents that his arrest was only reported, that took time, was only reported in one newspaper, the Washington Post, as if it was just a local story. Of course, his arrest was not a local story. Who didn't mention it? The New York Times, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Detroit Free Press, and many others. Dr. Hansen was and is being silenced. When America's top climate scientist has to resort to chaining himself to the gates of the White House to be heard, what does that say about our country? The trouble is, no one did hear about it because it wasn't reported, except for a few environmental groups on the internet. So why wasn't the arrest of our top climate scientist news? If you think that things are better now than they were 9 years ago, this photograph was taken 2 weeks ago in California. Dr. Peter Kalmus from NASA is being arrested at the Chase Bank doors in California, surrounded by 100 riot police officers. Why was Dr. Kalmus there? Chase Bank is one of the top funders of fossil fuel infrastructure. Our scientists are getting desperate. They're part of a new organization called Scientist Rebellion. Neither ABC, CBS, or NBC reported the arrest. As a matter of fact, 3 years ago, in 2019, 11,000 scientists declared a climate emergency. That number is now up to 15,000. So how did our press respond to the declaration of a climate emergency? In 2020, Media Matters found that corporate news shows made just 0.4% of overall news coverage, 0.4 in 2020. How did we do in 2021? Any better? In 2021, wait, there's a lag. In 2021, corporate broadcast TV covered climate change 1.2% of the time. That's last year, 1.2%. That's after the wildfires in Australia, after the wildfires in California with the poles melting, 1.2%. It's actually unbelievable. Can we call this non-reporting what it is? It is criminal negligence. That is what it is. It is criminal negligence for losing our ecosystems. After reading an editorial by James Hansen called Game Over for the Planet, the idea of a game as an artistic metaphor for the climate crisis came to my mind as a chess game, and a chessboard became my compositional format. My dad was a chess master. So this work is called Checkmate, Foxy Boxy, and it refers to the signing of the Paris Climate Treaty. And honestly, it was reported very close to the front page in almost every newspaper in America. It was really great, except for one publication. That would be Rupert Murdoch's New York Post. I didn't think he reported it, but I actually found the article on page 33. And it was illustrated by 3 swimsuit models. You can see it on the bottom, 3 swimsuit models. If something important is not reported, you have no way to take action on the problem. You don't know about it. Ecocide should be a crime. That is why the handcuffs on the left side of this installation surround the kangaroo, like Murdoch, a symbol of Australia. I've never seen an examination of Murdoch's investments in oil and gas, but I do know that Prince Al-Walid bin Talal of Saudi Arabia, major exporter of oil and gas, used to be a major investor in News Corporation and 21st Century Fox. Let's talk about the Paris Climate Treaty for a minute. Who came up with a goal of warming of 2.0 or preferably 1.5? How is that our goal? I propose that these goals are a distraction meant to buy the oil and gas industry time. The real question is, how much of the natural world are we willing to lose? Because at 1.5, 90% of the coral reefs will be gone. At 2.0, 100% of the coral reefs will be gone. Is this what we're aiming for? I don't know how many of you watch horror movies or read science fiction, but if you want an idea of what the world will look like at 1.5, I recommend reading the UN Special Report of 1.5, chapter 3. What does it say? It states high confidence of the frequency and duration of marine heat waves. High confidence of the frequency and duration of heavy precipitation events like the one that killed 12 New Yorkers last summer in their basements. High confidence of the frequency of droughts. Is this what we want? The goal of 1.5 is a red herring. We are in a climate emergency now at 1.2. We are at 1.2. How can we forget that Portland, Oregon reached 112 degrees last summer? British Columbia was 121 degrees last summer in Canada. That a mass mortality event occurred off the coast of Vancouver when 1 billion sea creatures boiled to death in low tide. That's at 1.2. 1.2. This is called It's the Agenda Stupid. It comments on the National Climate Assessment, which refers to temperature change in the USA. Unfortunately, it was upstaged by Harvey Weinstein, who was arrested the same day the National Climate Assessment came out. So particularly, the New York Post and the Daily News had Harvey Weinstein all over the covers. New York Newsday did something remarkable. They made their entire front page, climate change contradiction. The report was contradicting Trump, that we are in the middle of an emergency. And this is a classic example of agenda setting theory, 1972. What people think are the most important issues of the day are the ones reported by our media. People reading the Post and the Daily News had no idea that the National Climate Assessment was published. And for Newsday to come out with that was actually remarkable, absolutely remarkable. This is called Hush My Kush. It refers to the Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment. 2 billion people from 8 countries in Asia rely on the water and from glacial and snow melt for drinking water, agriculture, and energy. With greenhouse gas emissions rising at 1.5, we'll lose 36% of the glacier. If heating rises to 2.0, we'll lose 2/3 of the glacier. Where are people supposed to go? Where are people supposed to go without water? And why is the loss of water for 2 billion people not news? I found this information about the assessment in the New York Times, but where was it absent from? I found 7 national papers. It was absent from Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, the Houston Chronicle, the LA Times, the New York Post, the Chicago Tribune, the Dallas Morning News, the Detroit Free Press. Nationally, it was never reported. So the question is, how are people supposed to know that we're in the midst of a climate emergency if it's not reported that way? The artwork in this piece is ironic in that the presence of newspapers actually indicates an absence of news. The last installation I'm going to show you is an all digital work with digital news called What the Gap? The Emissions Gap Report of 2019 is a very important report. It's produced by the UN's Environmental Program. It analyzes where greenhouse gas emissions are headed and where they need to be to keep warming under 1.5. The report advises us we need to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 7% a year. However, emissions are now rising 6% a year. So the Earth has a math problem. How will we solve it? Murdoch's Fox News Network never reported the study, although a dozen other news organizations did. You can see in the composition that the Fox News icon starts at the corner and dissolves into storm clouds in the center. Murdoch's denialism does not serve the public well. Storms are getting more and more intense. This last slide is from Yale. Every year they publish a study called Global Warming, Six Americas. You can see on the graph on the left that 33% of the population of America is alarmed. On the right, a quarter of the country is dismissive, doubtful, or disengaged. When you add in the cautious, who are the cautious? The cautious are not sure if global warming is really happening, and they're not sure what the causes are. So if you add in the cautious, we're up to 40%. 40% of the American population are not sure if global warming is really happening or dismissive of it. Think about that. Almost half the country has no idea that a climate emergency exists. Almost half the country is out of touch with reality. This discrepancy is evidence that we are now living in a demi-democracy, not a full democracy. We have access to information if we want it, but platforms formerly known as news organizations don't deliver urgent news. They deliver other news, like alternative facts. It is astonishing that the Fox News network has been #1 in popularity for the past 20 years. I contend that our corporate news networks are 6 degrees of separation away from the total control that Russia exerts on its news industry. We are very close to that. You figure that 1% at a time of emergency is a red flag. I hope that I've made the case for exposing the suppression of climate news in our press and the catastrophic impact of lack of civic engagement. The science of global warming is not hard to understand. Our press has failed us. A system of information that is dependent on advertising dollars has distorted the meaning and purpose of a free press. The press is not free. I want to advocate today for a new system of news gathering, an American news service like the BBC, run by journalists and not by market research companies, hoping to make a profit. We need a public news service that doesn't depend on the whims of Congress for funding. We also need a system of education that doesn't teach to the test. Rather, we need an inquiry-based model of education. The educational philosopher Paulo Freire said, education consists in acts of cognition, not in transferals of information. Thank you very much. Before we go to Aviva's presentation, I want to just let you know that News Not News is a new catalog I have available on Amazon if you're interested in learning more about the subject. Aviva?
Thank you. I am going to go directly to a share screen. And let me make sure that we get where I want us to go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just,
Turn up the volume.
pardon me?
I just turned you up.
Okay, that's good. So let's go to the beginning. Marcia asked me to talk to my engagement with the Ecoart in Action book, what I think it represents, where I think it's going. And I'm going to focus specifically on the section in the book called Provocations, which I consider about the theory behind the work. Just to go a little further with what Marcia was talking about, and thank you to Carolina and everybody at Word Up for having us and this opportunity to discuss some ideas. I would just say that we are in a World War III, and we have been for a while. And the war is an environmental war. It's a war to control the resources of the entire planet, and specifically the permission to commit ecocide with impunity. So I'm speaking to you right now from Maine, which is Wabanaki land, and that is actually the view from my studio. I'm going to talk about the role of theory in Ecoart because we often think of artists as presenting whatever the issues are that are important in our society. I'm going to argue for the idea that artists can actually shape the issues in our society. And that's why I am interested in eco art. Art has always illustrated and represented and reflected the theory of the society that it emerges from. This is Raphael's Madonna with Jesus and St. John the Baptist. And this was an expression of the theory that the church dominated all of culture and all of society. And in fact, the origin of the word pity comes from a word that is for obedience. So the idea that we might have compassion for another was entirely entangled with a worldview that at that point was entirely white supremacist and colonial. And that's what artists illustrated, because that was the world that they knew. At this point, there are a number of artists, ecological artists I'm thinking of specifically, who have taken the format of conceptual practice and applied it to various sectors of the society. I'm going to talk about three artists and reference my own work as well. And one of them is David Haley, who's very much of a conceptual artist. But he represents a whole contingent of artists who are working with scientists and addressing some of the underpinning theoretical issues we need to solve. This is, of course, Georges Seurat's work from the Grand Jatte, which did illustrate scientific theory about color. But you can see that the figures are very wooden. There's very little evidence of interaction. And I would argue that one of the big issues that we have to solve is how to create a new model for interaction. And this is not just a personal concept, it's the basis for the legal system. The legal system is essentially an international discourse about what is right and what people can get away with and what they can't get away with. This is an image from Sasha Kagan's Triangles piece, which is in the book, and I'm not going to describe it in detail because you can go to the book and read it. But what he did was he created a game based on the theoretical work of Dennis Meadows, who worked with his wife Donella Meadows on the Club of Rome to project what kind of world we had. This was quite several decades ago. And Dennis created a game to embody a different set of relationships between people as a systems model. So his premise was it's not enough to talk about what we need to change. We actually need to embody it in specific actions, specific behaviors, and specific relationships. And this is from Sasha. I'm not going to read the entire quote, but I will read part of it. Thus, this game, unlike a choreography by a choreographer or choreographing participants, is something that highlights one, the complex system, two, the various groups and subgroup dynamics, three, the processes tending, harmonizing, and disrupting, and other possible effects, and four, emerging dynamic patterns. Now, this sounds very abstract, but we actually have to change the way the society thinks by changing the narrative. And you start with the theory, or that's my theory of how we do it. And this is an example of Michael Heiser's work from 1969, which might be the epitome at that point of a representation of colonization. And I copied the headline from this article that says, "From empty space into art." Well, there's no such thing as empty space in nature. And the idea that an artist could go in and create a monumental work that slices through the landscape and then sign their name to it, seems really abhorrent to the kind of thinking that I think results in any kind of change. And here we have an image of a Native American or American Indian woman and some of the baskets that she has created. Basket making amongst Native Americans or American Indians, I'm not sure what the current correct phrase is something that emulates to many of us the kind of culture and society that we need to use as our model to change what we're doing. We're creating objects on a production line, one way or the other, whether it's people or iPhones or whatever. In many indigenous cultures, whatever is produced is at the service of the whole community, and it comes out of the relationship with the materials they live with and consume. So, for example, many tribes in the Southwest have a long-standing practice of managing the grasses at the riverbeds, and that controls the temperature in the water to allow the fish to live happily. We are obviously not doing that, but it might be a good idea if we considered it. This is just the excerpt, the capture from one of Sasha's articles. Many artists now are publishing in scientific journals of all kinds to bring these ideas forward. This is a new idea about the relationship between art and science, that it's not just artists over here, scientists over there. We're actually working in the same territory at this point. This is Hokusai's famous breaking wave. And there are many stories about why he created this, but the one that stuck in my mind is that it represents how European expansionism was destroying the Japanese culture. And if that isn't an example of the impacts of international extractivism, I don't know what is. So this is referenced often. In fact, I'm referencing it in a sculpture I'm working on here in Maine as something that's simply beautiful and powerful. But the idea behind the power is a theory from the artist about what was happening to his homeland. And this is a quote from David Haley, from David Hockney, and it comes down to we must look at our spatial relationship. This is both a practical and a theoretical issue. One aspect of the practical is that if we don't adopt an attitude towards nature that's closer to indigenous societies, we will not have any nature and we will not have us. The other thing that this illustrates, this quote, is the long history in the art world of learning from each other in a process of discourse. So one idea comes from one place, somebody else picks it up, and it is expanded upon. So what the book represented to me was the idea that we can build on this kind of discourse as a crowd-sourced experience, admittedly selective because it is invitational. But now we have a book that's going out in the world and it will affect other people, and other people will have a chance to respond because no one's going to do this alone. We're not going to change the narrative. We're not going to change the behavior with one hero or one heroine. We need a massive movement that understands the depth of the problem, the scope of the war we're in, and is willing to put their whole lives on the line for that. So this is the book. One of the other contributors I want to talk about is Amy Lipton, who totally grasped the significance of artists coming forth with a new approach to art making. And this show that was developed with Sue Spade for the Cincinnati Contemporary Museum of Art, the Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati, that's it. in 2002 had a lot of people from the Ecoart dialogue presenting various approaches to changing the kinds of models that systems depend upon. And this is just a grid of images from one of her shows, specifically the idea that art making and food making can be symbiotic practices. And I believe that was the first and most important show that demonstrated, in fact, how that might be true, that creating food, just as indigenous people create basket making, is about a relationship to the entire habitat. Now, David did a piece, and I don't think it's in the book, but I thought it was really, really interesting about following the path of one drop of water. If we could tag a drop of water with a bacterium, we could follow it from the River Mersey all across the planet until it comes back to the River Mersey. And the point of that exercise was to emphasize how completely interactive our entire planet is, and specifically the role of water and the physics of the function of water in how we all survive. And I should actually have gone back to that for a second, because one of the things that David says that I think is really important is that his art making is not, and I apologize, I don't mean to be moving around like that. His artwork is really about asking a question. And that's a really important idea. It's something that scientists do routinely. As artists have moved into the conceptual realm, we are doing that. And that's one of the things that pulls the mask off the monster. You ask the right questions. And this is a theory that I developed called trigger point theory. It's about a strategic relationship to change that's dominated by 6 rules, including the ones that are in the slide. That play will teach. There's always a small point of entry into a chaotic system. The paradox of urgency is that there is time to change, even though we don't feel it or think it. And layering information will test perception. Metaphors are our idea models, and there will always be critical disruptions in sensitive initial conditions. And these are all basic ideas from physics. So I've just assembled them. On the left, you're seeing a number of sites where I produced the Blue Trees Symphony. The Blue Trees Symphony was a project that installed artwork, I'm oversimplifying, where natural gas pipelines were proposed. That was then copyrighted, and it was used to contest eminent domain takings for natural gas pipelines. It goes to the legal questions of ownership internationally, and to the larger question of how we avert ecocide. And this is really a whole theory, and I wrote a whole book. And the cover of that book is on the right. And this is just an image from the project. The installations were correlated to a musical score so that individual trees became tree notes in a complete symphony. Right now, I'm working on an opera based on the project, which will use a phone app to engage people internationally in a discourse. And my final slide on the left, Marcia, you will recognize that from the show that you curated, SOS Earth, at the Flummenhaft Gallery. And at the center,
Earth SOS.
SOS, Earth OS, thank you for the correction. In the center with the pink scarf is Amy Lipton, and on the right is Amy from another show at Ramapo College. What I want to emphasize here is the conviviality of these relationships. There have always been groups of artists who made some kind of a community. That's particularly true with the Ecoart dialogue. And that's particularly remarkable because we're so spread out internationally and there are actually so many of us. But we do try and get together, and we've been doing that since 1999. And the conversation continues. The book was one snapshot of time in that continuing discourse, and it continues. And we hope that it will include all of you going forward. And that is my presentation.